Nelson Mandela emerged from his long nightmare as a simple man walking his way to freedom accompanied by his wife Winnie.
The 1980s were turbulent times for South Africa, but also one of the most fertile periods in its musical history. Some of that music might have caught your ear on dance floors lately. Old records like Vio's Mashisha, Don Laka's Stages of Love, and Chico's I Need Some Money have been rediscovered and played out by festival favourites like Hani and Antal, as well as native South Africans like DJ Okapi and Isa. Fever. So how did this vibrant music end up disappearing for decades?
The bubblegum Afro-synth sounds of South Africa were stewed, consumed, and spat out for the next.
Apartheid was one of the cruelest regimes of modern times. Segregating society by race was a method of regulating national thought, identity, and freedom of movement. Police would beat black musicians, launch tear gas into live gatherings, and jail people for years simply for owning Mandela-branded T-shirts or coffee mugs.
We have no option but to continue.
It wasn't all about violence either. The government South African Broadcasting Corporation used its Radio Bantu as a further way to reinforce tribal identity.
Music was one of the vehicles that the government used to divide people, really. South Africans were led to believe that if you are Zulu speaking, you can only listen to Zulu music. If you are Shangaan, you can only listen to Shangaan music. If you're Sotho, only Sotho music. So everything was compartmentalized.
But music found a way to thrive in this suffocating atmosphere, inspiring efforts to resist repression and encouraging a newfound national pride. Yet this was no typical protest music. The most popular sound of the day was homegrown, colourful, and had a multiracial appeal, the slap in the face to apartheid's creed of separate development. Bubblegum had a different message, that better days were just around the corner. With newly available electronic instruments flooding the market, hits were relatively simple to churn out. The new sound was an extension of the glossy, aspirational feel of American boogie and funk. It caught on in discotheques and semi-legal drinking spots known as shebeens, where cover bands would run riot. There were some pretty brazen knockoffs at the beginning. Take Brenda and her band The Big Dudes, whose debut single, Weekend Special, was an enormous smash hit in 1983. Compare the bass line to that on BB&Q bands All Night Long. And the chorus structure to Sharon Red's Never Give You Up. You get a sense of the homage being paid to overseas imports.
Yes, it was influenced by American music because I play records out now and some DJs are pulling out sort of American synth pop records or Chicago house records, and it was almost a carbon copy but with their South African flavor.
The carefree nature of this hybrid style had critics and established musicians of the day turning their noses up. Legendary jazz trumpeter Hugh Masekela was especially damning. Disco is a social tranquilizer. You don't recognize other things.
Probably a lot of these South African serious jazz musicians, they probably thought, what is this cheap music? That's where the bubblegum context comes from. It's cheap, it's not so serious. However, the messages that they want to put across were serious.
Music was becoming a cultural battleground. The ruling National Party poured millions into Operation Optimism, trying to ride the success of Band Aid with pro-government sing-alongs.
Watching us on TV, never started to hate us.
But audiences saw through these tactics. Instead, they turned out in their hundreds of thousands to rallying events like Concert in the Park, held at Johannesburg's Ellis Park Stadium. The South African people were rejecting the indoctrination that separate is always better. As the tide began to turn, the government clamped down on dissent, calling a national state of emergency in 1986. Stars had to devise ingenious methods of promoting oppositional consciousness while escaping censorship. Bubblegum was used as a Trojan horse to get coded statements circling round the ears of the young fans. Radio favourites in the late 80s like Q-Tex's My Della and Chico's We Miss You Manelo appear innocent enough at first glance, but if you read between the lines, they encourage explicit support for the struggle movement.
I've been waiting for so long. Time is moving on, so speed up, speed up.
Mandela's release no longer seemed like a distant dream. The soft power of music had been converted into hard resistance and was helping to crack the edifice of apartheid. 1990 was a line in the sand following the shock announcement on February 2nd that apartheid was finally to end. The recent past was treated as a distant memory. The divide between blacks, whites and coloureds did not magically close, but newfound harmony was in the air.
Everything got changed. Our national anthem, they took 3 different languages and put it together. Our national flag got changed with the Rainbow Nation, you know. So there was a lot of optimism and positivity.
With the trajectory of the nation now irrevocably altered, Bubblegum lacked purpose and its popularity cratered. In its wake grew a sound that bolted a hip-hop bump into slowed-down house. This was the irresistible vibe of Kwaito.
People were tired of singing these political songs. We started putting on our own lyrics, you know, on those records. You know, this is where Kwaito was born. We're not writing about political things because we feel that it's time to celebrate now.
Kwaito's grooves carry on to this day in South Africa's love of deep house. When it came to Bubblegum, the country simply moved on, leaving much of it undocumented. Prominent artists fell into poverty, while stacks of second-hand records gathered dust in warehouses, garages and attics. Following such a historical schism, Bubblegum simply fell between the cracks. It wasn't until recently that interest began to bubble up again. Over time, DJ Okapi's Afro-synth blog and record store was set up to help join the dots of this undervalued golden era. Defunct distributors like Music Team have been connected with contemporary labels like Soundway and Rush Hour to authorize reissues and compilations. Now these tunes can light up a dance floor anywhere, whether you know the political intent or not.
I remember those days when we were so young.
But that baggage remains a challenge for South Africans to leave at the door.
I think there's a lot of psychological scars that people carry around with them, and the 80s was a terrible, brutal time. But out of this major pile of bullshit, flower came out, and that was the music of the time.
Even as it captivates audiences abroad, at home interest in bubblegum and other danceable styles of the 80s looks likely to stay niche. Perhaps the context is too familiar and too raw for now. But the freedom and vitality captured in South Africa's glorious apartheid-era pop couldn't stay trapped forever.